Every company you have ever worked for told you the same thing during orientation. If you have a problem, go to HR. You believed it because it was said with warmth in a room with free coffee, on a day when everything about your new job still felt promising. You kept believing it quietly in the background for months, sometimes years, until the day you actually needed it to be true. By the time you discover what HR actually is, the thing you needed protection from has already finished moving against you. Welcome to Marcus versus the Machine. Today, we are dismantling the biggest illusion in the modern workplace. Human resources isn't a support department, it's a risk management department. Their job is to minimize liability, to keep the company functioning, and to make sure nothing you do becomes a problem they have to solve in court. The person sitting across the desk might be kind, but the role itself has a different mission, and the role always wins. Here are the 7 hidden rules HR operates by, and the exact playbook you need to protect yourself. Rule number 1. HR processes complaints as risk events, not justice events. When you file a complaint, you expect an investigation driven by the question of what happened and who was wrong. What actually happens is a risk assessment driven by the question of what the company's exposure is if they do nothing. If you report that a senior manager is toxic, HR maps the cost of removing that person against the cost of your complaint. Removing a senior manager means disrupting reporting lines, client relationships, and leadership optics. Therefore, the system frequently chooses to quietly transition you out instead, because replacing you causes the least disruption to the structure. You were not weighed against the truth. You were weighed against the cost of the alternative, and you were lighter. Rule number 2. HR does not see your work, they see your file. You might be the most competent person on your team, holding projects together through sheer willpower, but HR has never watched you solve a problem at your desk. What they have seen is your manager's written summary of your performance. Your manager is HR's primary source of information about you, and there is almost never a second source. If your manager describes you as difficult or resistant to feedback, HR receives that as data. 2 employees with identical output can have entirely different reputations inside the same company, based solely on how their managers characterize them in private meetings. Your history inside a company is not what actually happened, it is what got written down. Rule number 3. Whoever documents first controls the narrative. This is the mechanism that catches honest people the hardest. In any workplace dispute, the version that gets written down first becomes the institutional default, and everything said afterward is measured against it. Imagine your manager sends an email to HR on a Tuesday describing you as increasingly resistant to direction. You, believing the disagreement was just a passing conversation, do not contact HR until Thursday. By Thursday, the institutional frame is already set, and you walk in thinking you are starting a conversation when you are actually entering a rebuttal. The truth did not change, but the order in which it arrived decided which version became official. Rule number 4. A performance improvement plan is a legal instrument, not a rescue mission. In many workplaces, a PIP is sold as a lifeline and framed with warm language about growth and support. The reality is that the PIP is an administrative tombstone. It is the record of a decision that was very likely made weeks or months before you ever heard the phrase performance concerns. The document exists to put your termination on a defensible timeline. The company needs the file to show they made a reasonable attempt to address your performance before firing you, thereby reducing their risk of wrongful termination claims or unemployment liabilities. If the goals on the PIP are vague, subjective, or rely on metrics like improving stakeholder perception, the document is not a performance plan. It is a trap designed to fail. You are participating in a paid interview period for the company's legal defense file. Rule number 5. Emotional escalation gets you reclassified. When you approach HR with emotion, you are not taken more seriously. Walking into HR upset, tearful, or visibly angry does not increase the urgency of your case. It changes how HR categorizes you. Emotional escalation registers as a signal that the situation could become unpredictable, and that containment might be necessary. If two employees experience the exact same problem, and one sends a calm, time-stamped email while the other calls HR in tears, the system treats them entirely differently. The first employee gets a structured follow-up. The second gets asked whether they might benefit from taking time off. The system rewards composure because composure signals that you can be processed quietly. Rule number 6. Confidentiality is an illusion. You report a concern about your manager, and HR tells you it will be handled confidentially. You feel a measure of relief, but the following week your manager's tone shifts, meetings become shorter, and you realize they know. Nobody violated a rule. HR disclosed what was necessary to investigate, and your manager was one of the people who needed to be involved. In this context, confidential simply means controlled distribution, not secrecy or protection. Furthermore, the act of going to HR at all becomes a permanent data point in your file. You are now marked as someone who escalated, and that label will follow your career long after the investigation closes. Rule number 7. The system is not broken. It is working exactly as designed. There are HR professionals who entered the field to help people, who listen with empathy, and who push back on managers behind closed doors. But they might still lose because the system evaluates performance on risk mitigation and organizational continuity. The system defers to documentation over testimony. It uses language designed to close doors without leaving fingerprints, and it protects the organization at every decision point. The gap that damages people is not between what the system is supposed to do and what it did. The gap is between what you believe the system was for and what it was actually built to do. So, what is your counter-playbook? You stop expecting HR to be your ally and start understanding them as a function with inputs and outputs that follow a logic you can learn. First, you document everything yourself on a personal device. You do this not out of paranoia, but because the system runs on paper, and you are either feeding it your version or letting someone else write yours for you. Save performance reviews, written compliments, and emails that show your wins before the company narrative changes. Second, you control your emotional presentation in every HR interaction. The system reads distress as volatility, so you must present with flat, factual composure. Speak in timelines, not feelings. Third, if you are handed a PIP, never sign it for agreement. Sign only for receipt, and within 48 hours, reply with a calm, written email asking for specific, measurable examples of the alleged deficiencies. Force the company to commit in writing to claims that are often legally hollow. Finally, build your exit options before the company controls the timeline. When HR is working against you, the goal is not to become louder, but to become harder to misrepresent. Once HR becomes part of the machinery moving against you, the question is no longer how to make them understand. The question is what will still be provable after they deny it. Stop hoping the institution will save you and start building your own leverage. If you want to master the unwritten rules of corporate America, hit subscribe. This is Marcus versus the machine. Stay sharp.